I do iFit on my treadmill, and they have a haunted New Orleans walking tour that you can do while you're walking. And it was at some like house today, and he had this device that he asks questions in, and then it, listens or whatever, and then it detects words and tells you the words. It was actually really cool. I was a little bit freaked out.
That's a fun idea.
An ovilus. But so then, what is it? What's your participation? So you're like walking on a treadmill, synthesizing that you're on a walking tour?
Yeah. So yeah, it changes the levels of your speed and stuff. And if you walk upstairs and it doesn't incline.
That is so cool.
I know, it's cool. I was like, ooh, I'm going to do this haunted tour. And at one point it was a little bit kind of dicey. And so I kind of stepped back on the treadmill and I was like, oh, nope, keep up.
And we could talk about creating ghost tours as well, since, did the LA Hauntings tour. But, so that's something interesting too. For one, it's another way that a writer can do something to make money, is create tours. But also, we were going to relaunch it as a walking tour. It was a driving tour at first. And then pandemic happened and like, well, I guess we can't do that. But then it's like, well, we can do it virtually still. We haven't, but we still might do that maybe over the winter as something fun to do as everybody's stuck inside.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Just carry a giant iMac around with you with the camera, and there might be easier ways of doing that.
There's so many things I want to do eventually, like augmented reality tours.
Right.
When you can be on location again. But I've never heard about the treadmill tour. That's so cool. I love it. This is What's Your Ghost Story. My website is what'syourghoststory.com. And to me, I've just, I didn't grow up with in a haunted house. I didn't grow up with some psychic ability that I was trying to understand or anything like that. But I think just about everybody found ghost stories interesting and wanted to look into it more. And then as I got a bit older, got into filmmaking, and I just wanted to merge those two things. When I began researching it, I couldn't help but really dive into it and then bring a camera along. Why not, right? And it's something I've been doing since I was 18, and I'm a little bit older than that now, so you might tell by the coloring on the sides of my head. Yeah, so we're just going to have fun, tell ghost stories, talk about why we love ghost stories. And then something I would always love to do, and I've gotten invited to do it a little bit, is consult on paranormal screenplays. So if we want to talk at all about like where's the reality, fact versus fiction, science versus folklore, all that kind of stuff too, we could totally get into that aspect of story. And maybe I'll pass it off to Max to say, let's talk a little bit about the Fantastic Story Society.
Yeah, right. So in case anyone is new on our event tonight, Scott, what is your title exactly with the ISA?
I'm the business development manager. So I do outreach to all the other outside organizations that work with us. And I also do all the video work for us.
All the videos, editing. Our YouTube channel is growing exponentially. You should all be subscribing to ISA's YouTube channel. I'm the director of education with the ISA. Shayna, why don't you give everybody a little bit of a background of who you are and what you do? No?
I am, when I always say my title, it's like, it sounds ridiculous. I'm the manager of production and research. So I do a lot of random things, including events and outreach. And I work with Max on our creative screenwriter productions. And yeah, I just do a lot of random
You're a writer.
Stuff. And I'm a writer, and I used to be a reality TV producer.
Right.
And then I switched to scripted because I was in reality since the beginning of like when Survivor and Weakest Link started, like way back in the like 99. So by the time I got to the point where I was like, I'm done with this, it was like, it's so oversaturated and just not what I wanted to be doing.
Shayna likes to escape reality.
Yes, I do.
Ironically, I tend to watch reality shows as a way to escape reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really why. I'm not a reality show fan like The Bachelor and that kind of stuff, but I do watch Ghost Adventures. I don't know if anybody is like a ghost investigation fan. I watch Ghost Adventures regularly. I've seen every single episode. Literally, they've had 21 seasons or
something weird like that.
Insane amount of seasons.
I liked the show Paranormal State. That was on.
Sure.
I don't like Ghost Adventures, but I liked Paranormal State.
I think the irony, and Scott, you can talk to this. Ghost Adventures is awful. I hate it, and yet I love every second of it.
It's that dichotomy of what is entertaining.
Yeah.
But I do, I had this revelation earlier this year that it's a brilliantly titled show because they're not the ghost scientists. It's the ghost adventures. You're just going out having fun, being silly.
Right.
And the big joy of watching that show, I think, is laughing at these guys that are such buffoons out there.
Yeah.
And you, as at least Max and I, who like to go out there and check some of these places out ourselves, we are watching and thinking what we would do different. And that's kind of part of the experience too, as a viewer.
Yeah. Yeah. But like Scott was saying, Scott and I host a podcast called the Fantastic Story Society. You can find it on iTunes. You can find it on the ISA website. And we interview people who tell fantastic stories, everywhere from a Wyatt Earp expert to someone who follows conspiracy theorists and tries to find out whether these are true, to paranormal. Scott doesn't like the term experts, and I agree. But investigators, people who are, prominent in their field. And it's just fun talking about these wild stories, whether or not you believe in any of these in any way, shape, or form. That's ultimately why I keep, focusing on this realm of storytelling, because technically speaking, there's no way to prove any of this is true or false. And that's what I love about it, because it's always that feeling or thought of maybe, it could be. And that's what I feel when I'm watching these scary ghost movies, or any kind of horror movies really are even more real. You can say, yes, people murder people. But there's that wonder. And I think that's what we kind of wanted to jump into first and foremost, to talk about why, and Shayna, maybe we'll pose this question to you. Why do you think horror and ghost, scary movies are always popular, have been, always will be?
Because they give you visceral reactions and you get to feel things immediately, even if it's a short burst of feeling. And then you get that relief of like coming down, and then you get up again and then down. And it's like exhilarating. I don't know. I mean, I don't really like movies where there's murder. I don't like murder. Like, that doesn't really excite me. Yeah. But I do like ghosts, and I do like kind of like, but I only watch movies like that in the daytime when the lights are on. Like if I watch something like that at night, I freak myself out. Like when I saw Blair Witch Project in the movie theater, I swear to God, you guys, I left and our car was in a parking garage, and that scene where that chick is standing in the corner. Oh my God. So I got home and I went in, and my roommate was taking a nap or something, or sleeping. And I woke her up and I told her about the movie, and I was crying because I was like, and then she's standing in the corner, and I had worked myself up so much and freaked myself out so much that, yeah.
I think ultimately that's what it is. It's such a raw feeling. And there's nothing superficial about the feeling. It's either you're scared or you're not scared.
You feel alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's real emotion, not real stuff happening, but real emotion.
And that is it. I mean, you hit so many things I like to say. And when I answer that question, it is, we are alive. It's all about living and having an experience. And that's the only scenario where you can feel absolute terror and fear, and you're actually safe the whole time. Otherwise, if you're feeling that, something went wrong and there's actual danger, but this is the only safe way you can experience that, other than maybe a roller coaster, but that only gets some of it, not all of it, not the actual, like, I am going to die here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the roller coaster part, I don't do roller coasters. Like, I will happily sit stationary on my couch and watch anything that's spooky. There's just something too real about sitting in a roller coaster. But that's a weird thing. I used to do them when I was younger in middle school, high school, and I loved it. And then suddenly I got older, and now it's like, something changed, I want to hit some of these comments for fun. So talking about Gettysburg, Neil from Ogden. Yeah, he's been to Gettysburg. And then what did Neil say here? I grew up in Pleasantville, New York, lots of places around here. Short trip to Tarrytown and the Headless Horseman. That's one of my favorite stories, Sleepy Hollow.
And I think a town with the name Pleasantville just has to have horrific stuff going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Totally.
They're hiding something in Pleasantville.
Yeah. In terms of, I had a segue there off of what we were talking about, but so to kind of follow along the lines of, this raw feeling of emotion, I have to laugh through a scary movie in order to be okay. Otherwise, I like, what is that? One of the first hidden camera type of movies.
Paranormal Activity or
Paranormal Activity. I couldn't get that out. The first one was really scary. And that one made me feel very uncomfortable. I don't know what it was about that. I couldn't quite laugh through it. If I can't laugh through something, then I'm like, this is scary. Or the really fun mystery movies. Like my favorite, to go to Joe's question that he's asking in the Q&A, what's your favorite ghost film? My favorite is from the early 1980s with George C. Scott. It's called The Changeling. Mm-hmm. And it's just, there are no special effects, nothing over the top. Now it's a cliche because we've seen so many haunted house movies, you know. The Uninvited in 1946 or 1947 really started the haunted house type of approach. And that was one of the first, I think, if not the first movies that had a ghost on screen. And it was scary because it looked so real. But then The Changeling just had a really great story. Like the characters, you were really invested in George C. Scott's character. You fell for him. You wanted him to solve this problem.
Shayna, do you have an answer for a favorite ghost story movie?
I think I like The Sixth Sense, and I like, there was one that I was just thinking of that I also like. Oh, The Others.
Oh, excellent.
Because those are pretty tame. Like I don't really like things that I feel are real, because it will like affect me and then I'll be like, but the first like really scary movie I ever saw was when I was 5, and it was called Night of the Scarecrow. It's not a ghost story. Well, it is a ghost story actually. Yes, it's about a kid. I think he's either autistic or mentally handicapped. Back then that was okay to say.
Yeah.
Not so much. And I think he got bullied and killed, and then he was killed as he was hiding in a scarecrow, and then he came back when they were like 30 years later, and he murdered everybody who did that to him when he was little. But I'm 5, and I'm like peeking in, watching this movie at my cousin's house, and there's one part that has stuck with me forever, and I think that's where I go to with like horror. It has to have comedy with it. So there's one part where he throws this guy down like a hay compactor thingy. So this guy falls into it, and then it goes smash cut to jelly going on toast. And it was like, that was it for me. So I think I like that kind of stuff where it's just like absolutely ridiculous, where you're like, oh God, I
think I remember the VHS cover to that, seeing it in the old VHS shops, and it was spooky. I never did.
It has haunted me forever.
That's such a wonderful edit that you point out. I'm blanking on his name now, which is killing me because I just watched Shaun of the Dead yesterday. But the director,
I love that.
Who's the director? But anyway, he does those types of great edits all the time that really continues the scene while starting a new scene. I love that. And there's a question about The Others, but I wanted to talk about The Others actually.
Edgar Wright, Scott.
Edgar Wright, absolutely. Yes, he loves those great smash cuts that are punchline and as sometimes even more gory, because you then associate something you've never seen before in real life, hopefully somebody get chewed up in a wood chipper or something, into putting your jelly on your morning toast. Love that.
Plop.
But so when I think location is insanely important when we talk about a haunted location, or when you're telling a ghost story, because it's one thing to say it's a big spooky haunted house. It's another thing to construct these bizarre little intricate things, like in The Others, that there's this fog that has enveloped the house and it gets thicker the further you get from it. And there's kids there that are light sensitive. So every door has its own lock, and each door has to be locked as you exit one room and go to the next. It's one thing to say it's a haunted house. It's another thing to say this house used to be a boarding house, and all these different people used to come here and stay here. And they're all circus folk that stayed here, and we're across the street from the Pioneer Cemetery and next door to the Clown Hall of Fame, and then the lake behind the house is where they used to throw all the elephant bones from the circuses. I don't know if that resonates with anyone.
What Shayna doesn't realize is that he's describing the house that I grew up in. Yeah, it was legitimately a boarding house, and across the street was the Clown Hall of Fame. The town I grew up in was the circus capital of the country from like 1820 to 1895 or something. And the irony is that there was never a circus done there, but all of the circus troops would come from Milwaukee, Madison, Chicago, Rockford, even further west. And they would stay in my hometown over the winter. So there would be all these circus people, all these animals. Like the circus would stop in the town and stay for 2 or 3, 4 months. And so my town became famous for that. So we have a giant elephant statue in the middle of the town. We have a huge giraffe statue right under the water tower. And yeah, it's the house I grew up in. I don't know if circus people haunted the house, but
Yeah.
Sure. Ghosts and clowns are scary enough. Clown ghosts, maybe that's something we have.
Forget about it.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
So Joe is asking though, how would you, since there is talk of remaking the others, how could it be improved upon? And I just watched it I think it was last weekend, and I don't know if you can yet. I think it's because so much relies on the twist. I don't think enough time has passed that people don't know what the twist is, for one.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the pacing is very important for that, because that is a slow burn, spooky movie. And if you try to speed up that pace, it's not going to hit as impactfully. I don't know if anybody has any ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think a remake for the others is a mistake.
I mean, go make something new.
Yeah.
Why do we have to remake everything? No,
but for everybody watching, if you do want to enjoy, and you really enjoy scary ghost movies, the Uninvited from the late 40s, if I could remember the actor's name, I'd say it, but it really kind of it's what all other haunted house movies are really based on. And it's a really enjoyable one. Like it's visceral, and watching it in that old black and white just makes it that much scarier. Yeah, anyway, but talking about location, so you keep going, because that's a good start, even though it was a nice segue into my scary house.
I was really just going to tee you up to tell any stories of your own. Well, but I do think location is vitally important. I think you should treat it as a character if you're developing a story.
Yeah. I mean,
this type of story.
I can share the one story, Shayna. I don't know if I told you the ghost stories of that.
Oh, spooky. No,
Yeah.
I know that just turned off. Tell me. I think I've heard one story, but I don't think I've heard it like the whole thing.
Well, so just about every night in my house, the house I grew up in, you would hear something relatively same time of night, between 2:30, maybe 4:30 in the morning. There would be the same relative sound. Ray Milland, there you go. That's who it is in the Uninvited. But you would hear something, and it was usually the same type of sound. It was like what sounded like somebody dragging Christmas lights over the hardwood floor, or if you had a big bag of marbles and you drop the marbles, it'd crash and then roll. You'd hear that at least a couple times a week. Usually you're asleep at the time, but I was 22 years old. It was the summer that my buddies and I really had a lot of fun. We partied just about every night. And I remember coming home one night in the summer, and the reason I remember it so distinctly was because I was joking to myself that I came home at like 1:30 in the morning, and I'm like, I didn't have anything to drink tonight. I was kind of joking at myself. Walking up the stairs, my nephew and my sister were living at the house at the time. Joey was in one room, my sister was in another room on the other side of the house. And I was trying to be quiet. I didn't want to wake Joey up. Joey would sometimes get up in the middle of the night, go by my room to get into my sister Erin's room, because he was either freaked out or he just wanted to sleep with his mom. So I'm going into my bed, laying down, thinking, okay, I may not have woke Joey up, so that's good. As I put my head to the pillow, I hear some movement on the other side of the house. And I'm like, oh, shoot. I woke Joey up, feel kind of guilty. And then I hear what sounds like somebody coming out of a bedroom. I'm like, all right. I just lay there waiting for Joey to walk by my room. But it turned into what sounded like a full-grown adult sprinting heel to the floor as hard as this person could run directly at my door. It was distinct, the difference. Like, a little pitter-patter of little kids' feet versus this was an adult and something was wrong. And I actually sat up in bed and like pushed myself away from the door. Like, whoa, I was not thinking ghost. I was thinking somebody's barging into my room. And I waited there, and I just was like, okay, and then I didn't hear anybody continue down the hall past my room. I didn't hear anybody go into my sister's room, and there was no movement outside my door. I'm like, all right, either there's a ghost in my room or there's a human just standing outside my door, which is equally scary. And nothing happened. I unbelievably fell back to sleep. And the next morning I asked my sister, hey, did Joey go into your room last night? She was like, no, why? Like, she wanted to know what was the ghost story of the night before. But that was the one experience I had that was visceral. My sisters had multiple experiences of seeing people floating over their beds, and, you know, people walking down the hallway. We would hear people walking down the stairs all the time.
Like this.
Yeah.
I would never.
My sister heard people talking in her bedroom about her in bed.
No.
Yeah. And that was the last time she ever slept in the room. Literally, she never slept in the room again. A lot of stuff, but just enough to spook you, but we never felt in danger. We were there for 26 years. I love that house.
You guys are going to make me have to turn the lights on. Now I'm like,
that's the whole point of all this.
Yeah.
You know, we got to scare some people.
Scare me. Oh.
Well, I mean, what I love, so, I mean, when I tell people about your stories, if you're not present to stand up for yourself, that's the one I always love to tell. And you've got more stories from your home that are even like grander and more terrifying, but because they didn't happen to you, there's not that level of emotion that comes across. And, you know, I want to have just fun and tell some stories, but I love to dissect why that resonates, because you like jump into dialogue at times. You really put us into the emotion of that, of hearing. We can visualize it so easily, the heel to the floor, the thud, 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 thud. And, you know, we feel your fear as you're getting up in bed, waiting to like take an impact maybe when this person bursts through the door. Felt like.
Yeah. Take an impact. Yeah.
I love that. That's terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, the story of my sister, my poor sister, who was like 11 at the time, she was most afraid of the house, and her bedroom had a big picture window that it was like a window seat, and you could look out across the street. We had a little cul-de-sac, and across the street was this tiny graveyard of maybe 60 headstones. And it was the original graveyard of the town. Like the founders of the town were, you know, buried there, and spooky little graveyard. But she hated clowns. This poor girl, you know, she was growing up across the street from Clown Hall of Fame. There's a graveyard outside of her window. She hated ghosts. And she would walk in her sleep sometimes. And she would walk in her sleep. And I remember waking up one night and hearing her kind of walking around upstairs, and she would talk in this like weird alien language. And I was like 7, and I would always be like, don't come in, don't come in, don't come in, because it scared me so much. Like, I don't want my weird sister coming into my room. But one night she ran down the back staircase and like ended up waking up behind the TV.
What if she was possessed by one of these ghosts?
Well, so she ends up one night having this experience. So my parents knew that my sister walked in her sleep. And so this one night she wakes up, and her bed was facing the open door of her bedroom, which looked out into the hallway. So her feet were pointed toward the hallway. And she woke up and she looked out and kind of raised her head up and looked out her bedroom door into the hallway. And she saw this black mist that was floating in the hallway. And it looked like a person, and it was moving toward her bedroom. And she freaked out and put the covers over her head, just like, I'm waiting this out. I don't want anything to happen. And she waited and waited. And she finally pulled the covers back. And there was a woman this far from her face, floating over her bed. It was a woman laying out. And I remember waking up to my sister screaming, just losing it. I'm like, what? You know, I was 7. What is happening? And she runs into my parents' room, and she was not making sense, of course, trying to tell my parents what happened. So of course, my parents just thought, well, Carrie's sleepwalking, and go back to bed. So my poor sister had to somehow make her way back into this bedroom. Years go by, like 6, 7 years. One of my mom's best friends is coming over to stay over for the weekend. And Celeste was her name. And she was just this kind of quippy, snarky woman that would just say off the cuff stuff all the time. And she was just coming in. They're in the entryway. My sister and my mom are greeting her, and Celeste asks where she's going to sleep. And my mom says, oh, you'll be up in Aaron's room. And so Celeste goes, okay, well, I hope it's not the room where a woman's floating over my bed. And my sister was like, what are you talking about? Just immediately crying. And my mom was like, what? No. And she's like trying to wave it off. And Celeste is like, yeah, last time I slept over, I woke up in the middle of the night, some woman was floating over my bed. So more than one person obviously saw it. And yeah, my sister to this day can't even look at the front covers of DVDs or movie jackets because she just can't watch scary movies. So yeah, so that's the bigger story of the house, the woman in black that we would call her.
Yeah, that's great. And by the way, I never answered. My favorite ghost story movie is a one that would rival Sixth Sense because they came out at the same time and they both had a little kid in it that could see ghosts, and that was Stir of Echoes. Kevin Bacon movie set in Chicago, and one of the things I love so much about it is that it, like most ghost stories at heart, it's a mystery. Why is this place haunted? And let's investigate and see what we can learn. And I mean, there are amazing. In this instance, Kevin Bacon is the lead character in it. His doors get open because he goes to a hypnosis session, and the hypnotist is like, because his wife was complaining that he was too close-minded, and she just kind of like offhandedly said, doors that were open to you will now be, were closed to you will now be open. And she didn't even know what really she was saying. But it made him a receiver to be able to see all of this, experience all this stuff. And outside of the hypnosis side, which is, listen, I don't know one way or the other on that. Beyond that, everything in it feels like a very realistic story to me. It feels like a very grounded, this could happen. I've heard ghost stories that kind of unfold. Maybe we don't always have a resolution and a happy ending, right. But the idea of an avenged death being or an unavenged death being what has caused a lingering spirit to torment the living. I don't know. I feel like
that's the most famous type of movie haunting. There's like a ghost who needs to be corrected, or the story needs to be told or whatever.
Yeah, that's actually one of my big pet peeves when it comes to ghost story movies is that they usually cast the ghosts as the villains. Like, look at the movie Poltergeist, which is another one of my favorite ghost story movies. Those were people that were buried in a place and then had their headstones taken away and some suburban house was planted on top of them, and they're the bad guys in the scenario. Like, right. Yeah, I'd be pissed off too.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Joe is asking, would you say Dickens' A Christmas Carol is the most famous ghost story? I don't know what the most famous ghost story is. I think that's probably the most well-known, but then again, I don't know if I'd call it a ghost story. And that might be a good way of asking, what does make a ghost story? Just because a ghost is in it may not necessarily mean it's a ghost story. And I think maybe it's because Dickens is our main character and he's experiencing things alongside active ghosts who are attempting to help him. I don't know. How would you go about that?
I mean, I'd call it a ghost story. I think that and Sleepy Hollow are really, I would say Christmas Carol is the most famous ghost story. And it also is a good reminder that Halloween is, ghost stories are not relegated to just Halloween. And in England, Christmas Eve is a good time to tell ghost stories as well, as we hear in that one Christmas song.
Going back to locations now, because you were talking about making sure to define the locations, but then it's this also trying to find a structure of telling the story. I'm just looking at some of our notes here. There was another little spot where, ghost stories to interweave. So true ghost stories still embody the importance of the location, like especially the gate in the Chicago area. That's a location, but then the stories of these ghosts live within it. So really, arguably, every ghost story has an amazing location that comes with it.
Well, it's interesting because there are modern ghost stories that take place at like a Target, because the place used to be somewhere more interesting. It used to be, I don't know, maybe let's look at a more specific example, which would be the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So once upon a time, it was a garage in the 1920s, and the city of Chicago wanted to get rid of and cover up their mafia history after, I don't know, the 70s or 80s. And today it's a park. So it's not scary at all. I mean, I've been there at night and it is kind of spooky. But the fact is, like, to look at it in the daylight, it's not that big of a deal. But to this day, like, animals will still freak out. I think people have recorded, people ghost hunting may have caught EMFs, EVPs, EMF detectors have gone off. The different devices basically will react in some way. But I always love when animals react because they are bias free. They don't know. They're just trying to go to the bathroom, and then they apparently see a dead gangster.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I mean, there are definitely ghost stories that make a place creepy, I guess. There are certainly creepy places that maybe people create an urban legend or folklore around. But yeah, not all ghost stories take place at spooky locations.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's good to be corrected, because you're right, because really it's the person who's experiencing the haunting that technically makes it the story. Like I did the most recent one I watched with ironically with Kevin Bacon is You Should Have Left. Have you guys seen You Should Have Left yet?
I've seen the trailer, but no.
It's worth watching. It was not groundbreaking. It's based on a book that I can't remember.
It's not based on the book. They just stole it from the book House of Leaves.
Got it. It's stolen from the House of Leaves.
Not based on it, because that writer's not happy about that.
Interesting. I didn't know.
Savoriness. Yeah.
Mark Danielewski.
Yep. If you have not read House of Leaves, it is a trip, and it is awesome.
Well, the movie was not, and it was trying to be. Like, it was trying to be a trip, you know.
Well, his book is like two generations, and it's different fonts and different. So you have to read. You can read one and then go back and read the other, and then they intertwine. It's really cool and
interesting,
crazy, and just read it. It's so weird. You're just it freaked me out. I had to stop, and then I kept going, and then I got through it. But
so here's something pretty wonderful that's oddly enough ties in. So that was Mark Danielewski wrote that. His sister is the singer Poe, and she released an album called Haunted. They basically
one of my favorite albums ever.
Me too. Rock on.
I listen to it all the time, and yeah, they go together. It's like a companion to the book.
Yeah, so they're in real life, their dad passes away, and they uncover these audio recordings of him lecturing and also just talking about random stuff. And they realize that they got to know their dad more after death than they knew him in life. And so in the album, Poe samples some of his speeches in her songs. So it's really fantastic.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite albums of all time. I love that, and I had no idea they were connected. And yeah, and then strangely enough, I met Mark Danielewski, and then I met Poe at a party, and I was like, wait, what? And then we went together, and then I was like, oh my God, I'm like, my whole world is just.
I got to go to parties with Shayna.
Yes.
I used to go to some cool parties. Not anymore,
but so why is it? Because we have another comment saying one of the scariest books I ever read. So why is it so scary?
Because, well, I mean, it's like you're going into this so it's the way I read it the first time, and I just bought it again because I lost it, so I have to read it again. But all I remember is like, it's like two generations of like going in this house, and then, I mean, it's like the walls, the inside of the house is larger than the outside, and like 8.5-minute hallway of going down, and like weird things happen. And then it's sort of like before they did found footage, it was kind of like that in the book. And then it tells another story of later of someone new coming in and like uncovering, I think, I might be butchering it totally because it's been a long time since I read it, but I just got it again, so I'm going to read it again. But it's a trip, and it is scary. Yeah.
Well, I mean, You Should Have Left then totally ripped that off. It's exactly.
Totally ripped it off.
That's
Absolutely.
crazy.
Yep.
Wow.
And one of the other things, and I have not read the book, just to be clear, but I have looked through it because
I'm going to send it to you because you need to.
I'd love to. But I've looked through it just because people have said the formatting of this book is out of its freaking mind. It's just, when you talk about story structure, not like how things look on the page, this would be fun examples, even though it's not screenplay. It'd be interesting to show a reader's experience. There we go.
Oh, there it is. I was waiting to see a ghost in your mirror behind you.
Oh, you didn't see it?
There's like pages like this.
How about that? It's huge.
She's just pulling random pages too.
No. See, some page like that. Yeah, a page with one thing written on it. It's.
I don't know. I feel like it might kill my like anxiety.
So cool. Oh my God.
Wow. And there it is. So yeah, most wonderful time of the year. Parties for hosting, marshmallows for toasting, caroling in the snow, scary ghost stories. Yeah. Funny because you grow up with that song. Every time I heard that, I'm like, there'll be scary ghost stories.
I know, like what?
Or like me, just washing over you, like you don't even think about it because it's just a lyric in a song that goes by. Like, wait a minute, why are they? Why will there be scary ghost stories in a Christmas song? But
like when you're saying all this merrymaking, and by the way, we're gonna make you crap your pants with some ghost story.
Excellent.
All right,
yeah.
What's next? Yeah.
What do we want to talk about? Well, so this is kind of an interesting dilemma I had, and we'll talk about the documentary I made a little bit. So there's when I was still living in Los Angeles, I got an email from a friend of mine. Actually, it wasn't even a friend of mine yet. Somebody that I had interviewed once. He is part of an paranormal investigation team, and he said, "Are you familiar with the Crosse Drownings? Because we just got called in to do a paranormal investigation related to them." And I knew a little bit of information. I didn't know all that much, but I was somewhat familiar with it. And the concept is that in this, it's a college town, but a smaller town in Wisconsin called La Crosse. It's right on the border with Minnesota. Over the span of over a decade, there is a bizarre number of regularly occurring drownings happening in the Mississippi River, all going in at the same place and all fitting the same demographic so acutely that that the FBI twice came out looking for a serial killer because it was so predictable when these people would end up dying. All young men. It's understandable that they'd be college age, but they're all athletic, active in sports, good grades, primarily the same race. But yeah, just it's the regularity, I think, was the thing that was setting off alarm bells so much with local law enforcement. And I thought that's really interesting to bring a paranormal investigation to an active crime scene and use a different type of methodology. That would be a cool documentary. So yeah, as writers or filmmakers, you know how often people come to you and say, you know what the story is you should tell, and it always sucks, But this is finally one where like, yeah, I'm in. And then I was completely blown away when it turned out the person requesting the paranormal investigation was the town's coroner. So this is the person coming from a scientific background that's examining the bodies of the victims and trying to draw conclusions and give official findings to the town and the loved ones, the survivors. So that was mind-blowing as well. Of course, he had to wait till he had retired before he could do this. And then it was like a 2-year investigation where I would come out in spurts for a couple of weeks at a time, and we'd interview people, we'd do paranormal investigations, and nothing amazing happened. Like there's never a ghost that popped up out of the river and said, "Yeah, I did it." But there was enough really weird things that like they start to pile up and make you wonder, like, is there something going on? Also, for me as the filmmaker, because I was not an investigator, I was just the filmmaker. When you start to look into the specific history and specific cases of the individual deaths, that's when it shifted me from saying, hey, anything bad coincidences happen, to, well, it does seem like there's something unusual, like beyond our plane of existence going on here. Because one person that passed away, he was going to school in New Orleans. His college required a swim class, and he was so deathly afraid of water, he transferred schools to not have to take a swim class. So like, I don't care if you're drunk or what, you're not going to be going down to go swimming in the river. And then the most, at this point, the most recent death, we know his entire timeline. One of the few people that we actually know everything that happened with him. He was at a wedding reception at one location in town. He was dropped off about a block and a half away from his girlfriend's house. But instead of walking about 2 blocks east, he walked over a mile and a half, zigzagging through downtown. We have video of him on a security camera, which is how we were able to piece some of this together. And then this was in February, and I'm getting the goosebumps right now talking about it. Eventually, because of the security camera footage, police dogs were able to come in and pick up his scent. And let's tell the most horrific story right now with little Tyler on screen. The canines were able to follow his scent to a set of footprints that went out onto the ice over the Mississippi River to a hole in the ice, and that's where they recovered his body. So none of this really added up.
There's no reason for him to have done that. Yeah.
Oh no. Like you think there's a lot of different moments where, and again, I don't care if you're drunk or what, you're going to say like, oh, I was meant to be going this way. I was walking the wrong way. There's so many times where you would realize that, oh, I'm in the wrong place, especially when you get to the edge of a massive river.
In February in Wisconsin, and you're afraid of swimming. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, none of these individual things means paranormal. But then also one of the things that the paranormal investigation group did that the coroner didn't do was ask the question, has anybody fallen in and then gotten back out? He's like, well, I only work with dead people, so I have no idea.
Right.
And so they looked into it, and there are a handful of people that went in and then came out because they were kind of like shocked awake, and they were able to pull themselves back out, and they have no idea how they got there. They thought they were in an entirely different part of town. And this is such a big issue in La Crosse that there's an Operation River Watch. So there are volunteers stationed in this park to stop people from going in the river. And they, for the most part, they shoo out people that just don't know it's closed. They got to get away. You're supposed to leave this area after dark. But they do encounter a good percentage of people that are in a trance-like state and have no idea where they are and have to kind of like be shaken back to reality. They don't know how they got there.
Weird.
Very weird.
So weird.
So the question for me, which this is something I grappled with for a long time, because I went out there, like I said, a number of times, shooting interviews, just getting scenic footage, doing the investigation type stuff. How do you tell this in a story? How do you tell this in a documentary? And that was the hardest thing. And it took me a long time to suss it out from a story perspective. And there's still no right answers. There never is when telling a story. For me, because it's an active crime scene, because people are still going in and passing away, it's a very fresh and sad experience that is part of the fabric of this town now. I tried so hard to not make it seem sensationalized, to treat it with sensitivity. So I actually waited at least a third of the way into the documentary before I even brought up the idea that maybe there's a paranormal connection here. So I bring it out first, just talking about the history, the sad crime theory history of this place, and then kind of smash cut without the jelly on the toast to telling the story of who these paranormal investigators are, and then bringing the stories together. That's how I approached it, at least.
Well, why did the coroner reach out to you then? Because he must have known that you had a paranormal research and investigation background.
The coroner reached out to the paranormal investigation team.
Okay.
And the reason the coroner did that is because he said, I've exhausted every other possible answer, and the one element that I don't know how to look into, and the one stone left unturned, is a possible paranormal influence.
Wild.
Yeah.
For a state coroner to say that, that's something, man.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing experience.
Well, so there's so much to say about that, but we got 15 minutes. We would love for anybody watching to share their own little experiences, where the location was at the very least. And because it's fun to hear. With Scott, when he's going out to places, I'll be out like, hey, let's just go to the bar, and he'll be researching, is this place haunted? Like, he'll just be looking it up, and that was like not the intention, but then I'm like, is it? But so we'd love to hear the stories. So yeah, we're paranormal enthusiasts. What interesting things have we not seen in a movie? And you mentioned paranormal theory. What have you been, I know you had some conferences over the past year or two where some interesting paranormal theories have been brought up, and I think they're just fascinating, because I'm all about energy and science, and connecting the paranormal to a scientific explanation. Even if it's supernatural, it's still fascinating.
Yeah, to me, this is the stuff that I really get into conceptually, philosophically, and it's one of the things I think is it's so great for anybody, because anybody that has any kind of a paranormal theory, it's just as valid as somebody that's been studying this their entire life, because we don't know. It's all just, let's throw everything at the wall. And it's kind of funny that sometimes more certain theories begin to gain more traction and you hear about it more. And one that was first introduced to me by Dave Schrader, who in more recent years, now he's doing the Holzer files on Travel or something like that,
Travel
sci-fi.
Channel or Discovery Network.
One of those. But he was, for a long time, he had his own radio show, a paranormal radio show out of Minnesota, and then went on to be one of the researchers for Ghost Adventures. But he loves the idea of time not being linear, that it's this ball that's just all thrown into this crumpled mess. And any place where those, if you think of it as a thread that's a ball now, any place where the thread is making connection to another part in time, maybe there's some bleed through. And the example he gives, this is not a real story, but just a theoretical, is say your grandma likes to sit in her favorite chair and watch Wheel of Fortune every afternoon. And she'll say, every so often, I see 3 ghostly figures kind of enter the room and then run away. I don't know what that is. It freaks me out whenever it happens. And you're like, okay, whatever, Grandma. Keep watching Sajak. And then
the old bag.
and then one day, eventually, your grandma passes away, and you're cleaning out the house with a couple of your buddies, and you go walking in the room, and you walking into the living room, and you see your grandma sitting in her favorite chair. And of course, you and your friends freak out and run away. Were you looking back in time while she was looking forward in time? I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's fascinating because it is an energetic type of thing. There's, everything's energy. We're all energy. We're connecting with different energies that we can't see sometimes. We've all walked into a room, whether it's scary or a different feeling, like it was an awkward pause. You can feel it. There's a feeling in a room sometimes. And how do you explain that? You can't explain that from, well, here's how I prove that this is why this. It's an energy. And so in my mind, I'm convinced of the energy, I guess.
I'll tell you guys my crazy energy story.
Yeah, please.
So back in, I want to say maybe 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, we were looking for a new place to live in. At that time, I think I was pretty like in tune with a lot of like ghosty stuff, and I was kind of into it. So I feel like I was in that space where I was open to things. And my boyfriend at the time had set up a couple viewings, and he didn't tell me anything about where we were going. So we show up at this house, like up in the hills, and we pull up and we walk up, and immediately I was kind of like, hey, I don't know about this place. And he's like, just go in, we'll look around, blah, blah, blah. And so we walk up these little steps and we go inside, and it felt like this house was like stuck in time because everything was small. Like back in the 60s and stuff, like everything was a little bit smaller. And so there was courtyard and it was small. And then you walk in the kitchen and like all the appliances are still old appliances, and it felt just small. It was very weird. And the realtor had a few people coming through there in and out. And I remember standing in the kitchen being like, I don't like the energy here. I don't like it. So
yeah,
my boyfriend at the time was like, no, let's go see. So we walk into the living room and there was a balcony like outside looking out on the street. And then to the right was this stairwell that went up to I guess the bedroom. And there was a tiny closet, like in really old buildings, there's the tiny little door.
Yeah.
This is super creepy. So I look over there and I was like, ugh. And we start walking that direction to go up these steps. And I got 3 steps up and I stopped. And I said, I am not going up there. This is creepy. And I ran down and I went out on the balcony, and I was standing on the balcony and I was like, I want to go. And my boyfriend at the time is legit freaking out. He was like, he thought it was funny at first. And then he was like, oh my God, let's go.
Oh, he felt it too. Like he didn't like
Well, he felt me because so we go down the steps and go out into the street and walk to the car. He goes, okay, I'm going to tell you what this house is. And I was like, what? And he goes, that's the Wonderland murder house where, that's Boogie Nights is based on, where there was this massive murder. I know nothing about it at the time. I went home and I was like freaking out. So I looked up everything. It was like one of the first investigations where they had video cameras and they filmed the whole scene, and you can look at all the murder scenes.
Wow.
So apparently right upstairs was like a horrific killing up in that bedroom I wouldn't go in. And then something happened right at the bottom of those stairs where that little door is too. And I was like so freaked out, but just energy wise, that's what I felt. It felt very constricting. It was just like,
totally. Yeah. There was a house that I just want to tell this quickly, but the reason I'm in Wisconsin, I ended up buying a house with my sister and my nephew out here, and this will be like my little kind of, you know, home away from home. We were looking at some other houses, and there was this house in just 3-4 blocks down, beautiful, huge house that they were selling for like $135,000. It was this ridiculously low price, but it needed a ton of work. We knew that going in, but it was huge. This is probably a 5,000 square foot, near Victorian style, unbelievable. We walk in there, and on the first floor, we were like, this is unbelievable. Like, we absolutely love this place. Okay, it needs some cosmetic stuff, but this is crazy. This is wow. You know, the kitchen needs to be gutted, blah, blah, blah. We go up to the second floor, and we were all kind of like not talking to each other. We're kind of like, all right. So, you know, and we're like, the bedrooms are big, and I started to feel as if when you, like, I react to elevation changes pretty easily. And when I'm in a plane, my head kind of, it feels a little different, like clogged or heavier or whatever. And it felt like in that second story, there was an elevation change. And I had this rising sense of anxiety, just not, I wasn't ill or anything, but it was just kind of like, it was harder to breathe. And then there was this door that opens up to the third level, which was this huge attic that was pretty much done, but it needed to be like redesigned. And we walk up there, and as I'm walking up, it was even worse. It was like thin air, total elevation change, and my heart was racing. I'm like, okay, the room, I was trying to think like architecturally, it's beautiful, right? But get me the hell out of here. We all leave, all knowing that, yeah, this is too much work. You need 150 grand to put blah, 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 you know. And we get in the car, and I'm like, did you guys kind of like, was this uncomfortable? And they were like, immediately, my sister and nephew were like, that was great. The place is so haunted. And then Joey said he felt a poke in his back as he was walking up the stairs. And so it's the feeling thing is real. The residual energy left behind in places is real. I'm totally convinced of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was Shayna's story made me think of the Villisca axe murder house in Iowa, which I don't know. It's not, you know, it does get featured on some of the paranormal investigation shows, but I don't think it's ever been. Actually, I take that back. There was a movie called Villisca that premiered at the LA Film Festival a few years back, but very small film. Anyway, it's a unsolved crime, horrific story where an entire family, and they had several kids, and there were even two neighbor kids that were staying over. Somebody apparently snuck into the house and just hid out during the day, and then came out at night and bludgeoned everybody to death. Oddly enough, with the handle end of the axe, not actually the pointy end of the axe, but still an axe murder.
I didn't know that. Oh God.
No, it's a strange thing. I think only one person actually caught the blade end, but so. And it's so fascinating. Again, the idea you can experience, and this is, I think, good for anybody that writes ghost story, anything, screenplays or stories. You can experience a paranormal event with all of your senses. There are phantom odors. You can be touched or scratched. Obviously, sights. You hear things, of course, disembodied voices, footsteps, all that. But also, of course, the sixth sense, the feeling that someone is there, that something is there. And you could, and it's not always negative. I mean, I've got stories where I was in a terrible mood and I walked into a place and suddenly I was really happy. I've got a story from somebody that was checking into the Roosevelt Hotel, and when they went to open the door, a maid was standing inside, who then vanished after a moment. She was smiling warmly at him, and the only rational reaction is to jump and be frightened, but a positive impression was placed on them, and they just felt like, oh, what a nice welcoming. I feel very comfortable here. That's not normal. That's a psychic impression. You shouldn't feel that way.
We do that in every room. We have a ghost maid in every room.
Exactly. Talk about the amenities. But yeah, so my friend of mine who's a big paranormal researcher, more so writer, a great writer, actually the person that inspired me to start writing in the paranormal is Ursula Bielski. And she talked about driving down with a friend, and it was a road trip driving from Chicago down into Iowa, which is not a nearby drive. It's a long drive. And they were just kind of happy to be out and about, and they were all kind of lighthearted, even though they were going to this scary location. And they arrive, and her friend met up with the owner, the proprietor of the place, and they walked to some place I don't know if they were doing business or what. And she just starts to wander around the house, and she said as soon as she walked into a certain room, she just crumbled. She began like hysterically crying and had to run out of the house to catch her breath. And she didn't know at the time, but she would walk into the room where the two neighbor girls were sleeping when they were killed. And the neighbor girls were the same exact ages as her two daughters at home. So like something on a psychic wavelength level resonated extreme. Yeah.
It's just hard to explain that kind of stuff other than just, I believe you. Although when I'm watching Ghost Adventures and stuff, they're like, oh, I feel kind of sick in here. I'm like, come on, man. Like that part, this is a ghost investigation show. The feeling thing just doesn't really do it for me. Like personal stories of people that are not going to get anything from telling that story, then I totally believe them,
Well, especially if they didn't do it in every single episode,
Every episode.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
That would help.
Suzanne left a cool comment. So something weird happened when I visited a castle in England in the 70s. My stepbrother took a picture of 2 suits of armor flanking a huge fireplace mantelpiece. Once the film was developed, we had a blurred picture showing the 2 suits of armor bent forward as if about to fall. Of course, they were totally immobile when the photo was taken. That's cool. The photo story, that's my favorite story that you've ever told me, Scott.
Yeah, I'll tell it here because it's a good segue because it's Ursula. It's her story, but that's outstanding, and that actually reminds me of a it's not as extreme, but in the book I wrote right here, one of the locations I talk about is on the south side of Chicago, and it has a long mafia history, an amazing mafia history in that it's got connection. It was a second floor's brothel. There was a casino, a full big casino. And they had tunnels, 3 different tunnels underneath that went to different places, including just under the street to the basement of the ballroom next door so they could keep supplying booze out that way. And so much of it was locked in time. It wasn't really used very much up until like it was unoccupied for a long time. And then in the 70s, a biker bar owned it, but they only ever used the main floor. So much of this location was locked in time into the 90s. But one of the things that they found when these new owners took it over in the 90s was they found what looked like a beautiful and was a beautiful table with a chessboard built into it. And it's like all Italian, engraved, inlaid tiles and all this. However, the table slid apart and flipped open to reveal a roulette table was hidden within it. And allegedly, people have taken photos of that table and have seen chips on the table when the picture was developed that weren't there when the photo was taken. So
I love that.
I love that. Yeah. And that's not even the photo story you're talking about, but it just makes me think of it when inanimate objects react differently on film.
Right.
Like we don't have an answer for this. It's just interesting. It's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's my favorite story. It's probably the scariest one because I might butcher the story a little bit, but you asked Ursula what her favorite, scary story was. And she told this story about how a couple were honeymooning in New Orleans and they were amateur photographers. And so they were taking pictures of everything on their honeymoon. And they go through the whole honeymoon, have a really fun time, stay at some neat old places. They get back, to wherever their home is, and they're developing the film. All the photographs came back totally normal. They were not trying to find, were they trying to find ghosts?
They were. Yeah, they were hoping to see something spooky on their photos.
That's right. So they were trying to find something. Nothing came back. All the photographs were blank, so-called, of ghosts, except one photograph that they found was taken of the 2 of them from above while both of them were sleeping in bed at night. That just is the greatest. Everything about that I can't get over. Even if a human being stuck into the bedroom, found the camera, got in a ladder, and then got above them, I don't know how you explain any of that.
No, and could you imagine being them going through your photos after you get home like, well, wait, what? How did this happen? There's no way.
You wouldn't even know what you're looking at. Like, who are these? Who are you? You're taking pictures of 2 people in bed? Like, how the last thing in my mind would be a ghost took our camera, floated above us. Click. It's just so weird.
Well, and also similarly, there's the Bell Witch Cave down in Tennessee, just barely south of the Illinois border, in Adams, Tennessee. Which is an awesome place to go visit and just, it's historic, but it's also a cool cave exploration with a long haunted history. Allegedly, the one of the only deaths ever blamed on a ghost. but people would take field trips there. If you're in that area, it's kind of part of local culture and folklore. And so one of the things that, I don't know if they still do this, they may have stopped, but they would have a class photo taken at the mouth of the cave. And sometimes certain kids would just not appear in the film once developed. Like, imagine if that was you. Like, where am I?
Seriously, I guess I'm dead. That means I'm a ghost? What in the...
This can't
Oh,
bode
my
well for my
Lord.
future. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're at the hour mark, everybody. I mean, last thoughts and stuff, Scott. What do you think? I mean, this is really just a fun little ghost storytelling episode, you know?
Yeah, and one more chance if anybody does want to comment. If you have a question, there was a question. It's a whole bunch of different movies, and unfortunately, I haven't seen most of them. Of course, I've seen The Haunting, great movie. The Uninvited and The Innocents. Those are both Rogue. What was his first name? Nicholas Rogue films, I believe. Exorcist, of course, one of the classics of all time. Changeling, actually, that's one that Max did mention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then The Uninvited was that one of my favorite old scary movies. The Haunting, it's so hard to remember now because there are so many different movies called The Haunting.
Yeah,
But
the Shirley Jackson original. Which there's a new movie came out this summer. It was premiered. Where did it premiere? I can't even remember. But anyway, it's on Hulu now. It's Elizabeth Moss plays Shirley Jackson. I think it's good. I haven't seen it yet though, but it looks interesting.
Okay. Now I have been told by my parents that I need to see The Innocents. So, yeah, there are so many great scary movies, and it's just about sitting down and investing your time in watching these things, and then just paying attention to how you feel, like as a writer, how you feel, why, and when. And really think about, okay, why was that moment on screen scary? And break it down. Look at all the elements: structure, character, what's the overall concept, how does it relate with all of it? Obviously, the words on the page and the script matters, depending on what the voice might be saying, but it's all connected to how the character's reacting to the situation within where they are.
And I do really have to, I know this is promotion, but I mean, there were so many moments when we were making our episodes of the Fantastic Story Society where somebody told a story and I thought, I've never seen that in a movie, which is, it's so hard to come across those moments, but it comes up a lot actually. When you're looking into the paranormal, there are, oh gosh, I need to, I can't remember even what this is called, but there's a book I read earlier this year called The Unseen Hand. New exploration of poltergeist phenomena, who is written by Jenny Ashford, and I want to get her on our show. But she talks about it's a really amazing book with tons of great stories. But there's a phenomena in certain poltergeist cases where these like voodoo doll type things, but life size, appear, where people's clothes suddenly appear somewhere in the room as if assembled as a being is there. Like, how terrifying would that be to walk into your room and suddenly there's like a ghost, like a scarecrow family that's been assembled sitting on the couch. But that's something that happens. I've never seen that in a movie, and that would scare the crap out of me if that happened in person.
It's just ghosts trying on your clothes. I'm tired of not wearing anything.
Nice. And the question, great question. What are your thoughts about mirrors? They're seen as portals. And that's where I love getting into folklore. And that is certainly a folklore that, especially the Myrtle's Plantation, that's where a really famous mirror story comes out of, where you're supposed to, if you're holding a wake, especially, cover the mirrors, because it could confuse a ghost also, and they end up getting trapped in the mirror. And at the Myrtle's Plantation down in New Orleans, the story is that they were holding a wake and all but one mirror was covered, one accidentally left uncovered, and there's this handprint that they just can't wash clean now. And they think that something was stuck inside. I mean, do I believe that they're portals? No, I don't. I don't. But I love to contemplate those types of things. And there's a lot of amazing folklore out there and traditions.
What I would argue, and this is more philosophical, is that the portal is the alive person looking at the mirror, because I'm a firm believer in how our energy is connecting to a space, because we heard from the owners of the house that I grew up in, the people who sold it to us. They only stayed in that house for like 5 years or so, and they never told us why they were needing to sell it. And years later, this was literally, I think, like a year and a half ago, we find out that they moved out because the young girls that were living there, the daughters, were terrorized by some kind of spiritual haunting. They couldn't live in the house anymore. So we were like, then our energy must have been totally different in terms of what we brought to that situation. Not that the girls were bad. It's just a different makeup. So when I think of the mirror situation, some people may have experiences, other people may not, because of what not only we're bringing consciously, but just energetically that we're not even aware of. I don't know. That's the only way I can write it off or explain it.
Well, I think that's fair. I mean, we're always seeing things through our own lens. And I like to point out, on Amazon, there's a documentary called Finding Jay. It's actually about Bigfoot hunting out in Kettle Moran. It's this enormous forested area that goes through a big chunk of Wisconsin. And I'll tell you, it was the scariest night of my life. The first time I went out with him looking for Bigfoot, which I love all this stuff. And I've never gone looking for cryptids before, but why should I believe in one thing and look down at anything else? It's all unknown, and I don't know. You can't be an expert on it. But things happened like crazy that night. But then I realized while I was out there, like, well, I'm out here as a ghost guy, and I'm seeing things that I would call ghost lights. There's these floating orbs that we're seeing illuminate around us. And I saw lights like crazy, not lightning bugs, but like something else. I don't know what it was. And then I'm like, well, this guy, he's seeing some sort of a Bigfoot explanation to it. And I bet if there was demonologists out here, they would see something demonic. So we're all seeing it through our own bias.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. One last thing I did want to short story. I want to, and we can get back right away to what you're saying. But before we go, I just want to talk about shadow people a little bit.
Oh God. Shadow people scare the hell out of me. It's the one ghost haunting that I'm like, I don't want anything to do with it.
Well, so this is a phenomenon I haven't seen very much. I mean, you might see dark creatures, dark shadow forms in movies, but I don't think I've seen anything that's specifically about shadow people, except now that I say it, we watched a movie called Under the Shadow, Max, an Iranian film that came out at Sundance back in 2015 or 16. I don't know if you remember that one. It was an Iranian film, but it had to do with the jinn, D-J-I-N-N.
Oh, yeah.
But so that was a little shadow person-ish, but so first off, personal experience. When people would ask me if I've ever seen a ghost, I would usually tell this following story until I started to research it more and realize that no, I didn't see a ghost. I saw what we would call a shadow person, which is this black figure, blacker than black figure, opaque. You cannot see through it. And oftentimes it's got this little outline, you could say, around it that to me looked like television static. That's how you see it, because a lot of times you'll see it at night, but it is this illuminating staticky outline to it. And again, you can't see through it. Usually seen basically exactly how I saw it at night. It's seen pretty briefly, and usually in your bedroom as you're going to sleep. So it's a good time. Very comforting. And so in my story, it was not in the middle of the night though. I was, I think it was afternoon or later afternoon, and I was with a friend, and I fell asleep while watching TV. We had a movie on. My friend didn't know I'd fallen asleep and said to me something about whatever was on TV, but not knowing I'd fallen asleep. And it forced me to wake up, and I looked over, and between them and the TV, I saw a human form, just as I described it, totally opaque. You couldn't see through it, with that shimmering outline, standing beside her, looking down on her. And it was so sudden that I wasn't afraid, because it was just too quick to be afraid. It was startling though. I'm like, oh, somebody's here, is what I said as I sat up really quickly. And then it faded, but really quickly. Like, as an editor, I always say it's like a 3-second fade or 3-frame fade. And so I just thought, like, oh, I don't know what the hell that was. But at that point, I realized that before I fell asleep, I felt what seemed like a hand just kind of glide down my leg from about my knee down my calf to my foot. In that moment, though, I thought maybe there was a blanket on me that was just kind of like falling off the furniture. So of course, at that point, I got up and I looked on the floor, and there was no blanket. So shit, something touched me.
Right.
And I just thought this was a ghost story for the longest time, until researching a little bit more about shadow people, and they're described exactly as I just described them. Like, well, I don't know why this happened. But upon further research, these things are viewed mostly in intensely negatively impacted areas, like old prisons, asylums. Waverly Hills and down in Louisville is one of the places where people see him all the time. This friend I was with was going through an incredibly dark time in her life. So the place wasn't haunted, as they say. It wasn't the place that's haunted, it's the person. And in her case, for whatever reason, these things are attracted to negative energy, and she was apparently a beacon of it. It was just so amazing to see this thing apparently feeding off of it in my presence.
Well, so, don't they say it's interdimensional, and it isn't necessarily,
yeah. So this is where it gets really interesting, especially as a writer that wants to put together a fascinating story. We don't believe that they're ghosts. We believe that they are interdimensional travelers. Or this, I shouldn't say we believe, but one of the theories out there is that there may be interdimensional beings. And for the longest time, we thought these were entities that were just kind of like bleeding through, kind of like the thread, the ball of time. There's accidental bleed through, and maybe they're seeing our forms in their dimension every so often. Who knows? However, just seeing something that kind of lines up enough. But the physical contact is something that was really weird to me. That was the one part of my story that didn't line up with any of the other research I had read. And then I was giving the LA hauntings tours, which I did for a long time throughout downtown LA and into Hollywood. And I had two people on, I think, back-to-back weekends even, kind of pull me aside and say, like, I have to talk to you. What do you know about shadow people? Because I have issues with them. And in both cases, they were guys about my age too. I don't know if that's relevant or not, but I'm throwing all the information out there. And they talk about being attacked by these shadow figures. And what was so staggering about it is that they both use some of the same phrases sometimes, including being attacked from behind and like wrapped up in a bear hug where they couldn't pull their arms from their chest. On one guy's case, he was in the Navy and still stationed on a ship. And so the attacks were happening on a ship, on a military craft. One of the guys would talk about, and the other guy was in his apartment at home. So that sucks. But he would see the street light coming in and illuminating the wall to his left. And he would see that there are two people fighting. So it wasn't just like his imagination going crazy. He saw two shadows fighting. And I think it was that same person who said that eventually he was able to get a hand free. And it's just, then I elbowed him. Like, well, what does it mean that you elbowed him? Did it just like go through the air into nothingness? It's like, no, it was solid contact that I made. And the thing that really freaked me out, both people, I asked, like, okay, you're in this fight that seems unwinnable. How did it end? And he said, they said, again, individually, totally separate people, they said, once I realized I couldn't win the fight, they left. Whew, that's still so chilling to me. So getting back to theory, if they're interdimensional travelers, maybe they're testing the water. Maybe they're coming through.
Almost in like a spiritual self-help approach of these beings take on your negative energy. They take it away from you, because you got to check to see how soon after they have an experience with these people do they actually kind of right the ship a little bit. And if they're thinking, I give up, I give in to this negative energy, then maybe that's a way to let go, and then they're leaving. I don't know. That's
beautiful, man. I love it. I mean, it's so much more positive than everything else, because the other theory is that this is just stage one of an invasion, and they're just testing to see how easy it is to overtake humanity. So yeah, I like Max's answer better.
Well, that would mean everybody's going back. Yep, it's easy. We can wrestle them to death. You know.
Yeah, their hands don't go the other way. If you're behind them, you got this made.
They're taking notes.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who hung out and chatted with us or just watched, very much appreciated. I do have a book on Chicago ghost stories called Voices from the Chicago Grave. It's on Amazon. There's a Kindle version of it available too. So if you prefer that route, I had the link and I lost it, but you can just search that title, Voices from the Chicago Grave. My name is Scott Markus, spelled with a K.
And even if you're not looking for Chicago ghost stories, they're just really fun, great ghost stories. Scott didn't even talk about one of my favorites, and there's multiples, but all the stories on Archer Avenue and The Gate and Resurrection Mary, and I mean, there's so many great stories that are you've probably heard of, but they all originate from the Chicago area. So it's a fun read.
And I'm a big nut when it comes to history. I love to do the research and find these nuggets. One of my favorite, I'm not even going to get into the ghost story, but Frank Nitti, he was the crime boss after Capone, and he's depicted in The Untouchables. And the story in The Untouchables is that he jumps off a roof, and that's kind of the end of it. But in reality, he did kill himself. But there was this amazing story of him bringing a gun to his head as a freight train was passing by, and the people that were operating the train's crew was jumping off and trying to like dodge bullets and wrestle the gun from him. It's like way more interesting than this Hollywood movie version. So I love when I can find some of the true facts that are way more fascinating than the stories we've been told over the years too. That's,
true.
I kind of nerd out about that.
Truth is better than fiction sometimes.
Yeah.
But, yeah, well, thanks for joining, everybody. Happy All Hallows Eve. Happy Halloween. Enjoy your weekend.